Once again, you can find Brian Blessing's work on Twitter at Brian Blessing and check him out over on our Bang the Book YouTube page. We got one more guest, one more segment here for this November 19th edition of Bang the Book Radio. That is professional handicapper Ralph Michaels from WagerTalk.com. Ralph, how's it going today, man?
Adam, going great. Appreciate being on, and gotta love mid-November with every sport in full gear now.
Yeah, it is a very, very busy time of year, to say the least. So I know you're doing a lot with college football as well as college basketball. We'll tackle those two sports betting markets here on today's show. We start on the college football side of things, and this is a very interesting time of year because you've got a lot of differing motivations. You've got college football playoff, you've got division and conferences. You also have teams that are just ready for the year to be over. So a lot of interesting things going on in college football here as we head into week 13.
There is, Adam, and there's a couple things I wanted to bring up. And, for those that follow me on Twitter, they know I don't give my opinion. I don't pay attention to stuff going on in Twitter. There's no politics. I just put up information that I learned handicapping, and I love sharing that information. And this goes back to the North Coast days and situations that occur. And with, the Killer Sports database, it allows me to actually back up things that we've talked about. And, when you're looking at those things we've talked about, the numbers back it up. So let's go through and show some of those situations. Well, we know that every team goes in the season basically wanting to get to a bowl. I don't care who you are. When you're going through your schedule, you think, well, there's potential to win this game and this game and this game, and we could probably get to six wins. When you have your seventh loss and you're off a loss, your bowl hopes are dashed. Your postseason hopes are dashed. So when teams are off a loss and it's their seventh loss of the season, and now they're a home dog of 8 or more, so they're a bad team anyway. Since 2014, those teams have gone 18-33 against the spread, 35%. The fades this week are Bowling Green against Ohio and South Carolina on Clemson. Now, the South Carolina situation you have to look at and weigh in the factor of having your rivalry game on deck, but just something for our viewers to have moving forward. When you're off a loss and it's that seventh loss, it's normally a negative play on that team. Now, on the flip side of that, when teams are trying to get to a bowl, you're in November and you have 5 wins. Now you're a home dog this week. What happens? You have pressure. We need one more win. You're probably looking at your schedule and say, hey, if we get this game, we're going to a bowl. We get to go and celebrate the postseason. Well, since 2014, in November, when a team has 5 wins and they're a home dog, they've gone 29-57 against the spread, only 33%. Often public thinks, oh, they need a win, or they're due to win, or they need 5 wins to get to a bowl. Well, that's just added pressure. That's more pressure on this team. That's more anxiety. That's teams that are starting to play a little tighter and make mistakes. Those fade teams this week, Arizona State and Charlotte. And just one more that I've been talking about on Twitter for, this entire season. When teams are outgained by 120 yards and won the game, and now they're an away dog, they've gone 14-34 since 2014. That fade is on Illinois against Iowa. But listen to this. The last 29 plays, if you're a dog of 1 to 18.5, so you're not a 19, you're not a 20, you're not a 30-point dog where a lot of times in November the favorite doesn't care. The teams that outrushed their foes by 120 yards and won the game and now are an away dog, 4-25 against the spread, 13.8%. So that's Illinois. So again, 3 things we talked about. You're off a loss and it's your 7th loss of the season. You're a home dog of 8 or more. That's a fade. November, you have 5 wins. Now you're a home dog. That's a fade. Teams that outgained their opponents by 120 yards and won the game. Now they're a away dog. That's a big fade.
Well, I think it's important too, and those are all very, very good trends, very good sample sizes with those as well. The thing about it is, if you've got 5 wins, and you're this late into November, you're not a very good team. And I know everyone's kind of beating everybody this season, but you get that must-win inflation that gets built into the market a little bit. Or as you mentioned, if you're a home dog in that spot when everyone knows that you need to win that game or win your next game, yeah, you're probably not that good of a team. So why would you want to trust some of those teams unless all of a sudden they flip the switch and they're playing really well for one reason or another? But if they have 5 wins at this time of the year, it's not really a team I want to bet on with expectations.
Agree. There are certainly different situations. And, we've seen some teams, Miami of Ohio a few years ago, I believe, was the first to go 0-6 and then win their last 6. Obviously, you're looking at a team that's red hot, and that's a different situation. But too often at this time of the year, teams are banged up, teams are injured, teams have, expectations that are blown. And we think just because they want a 6th win that it's that easy to get. Well, it's not. You're the inferior team, and the other team's trying just as hard or harder to get that win.
Yeah, and of course, too, I mean, it's very hard to quantify this. It's very, very hard to get into the minds of these teams and of these players. But some of these teams don't want to go to a bowl game. They don't want those extra practices. They don't really care about playing another game, especially if you're a team that, usually you have greater expectations for a season. Now you're not going to get to a certain point. Maybe you don't want to go play in that bowl game. Maybe you don't need that bag of swag or to get beaten up again. Especially for a younger team, I think this could be the factor, because for older teams, we've got some senior players. They want to get another opportunity to show themselves in front of the scouts. Sometimes those younger teams maybe don't value that bowl appearance as much.
Well, I can tell you this. That's the $1 million question, Adam, is what the players want. I guarantee you that the coach wants, because when the coach is going to get 15 extra practices in December, it is such a boost towards the next season, getting those young kids in and watching them play against the number ones, against experienced veterans. Because remember, when you get into spring practices, you're missing all those seniors that left. And when these freshmen are practicing, well, they're now practicing against backups. They're not practicing and learning the experience of practicing against the starters like they do when you get to the bowl game practices.
Anything else before we break down a couple of specific games here for this week that you want to touch on? I mean, again, at this time of the year, obviously you've got weather considerations to keep in mind, but also, your power ratings maybe lose a little bit of value just because you're trying to figure out, a team like Clemson, for example, I can't power rate them high enough. I can't do it right now to get the spreads that they're being asked to cover. And of course, they're covering them rather easily. You get that at this time of the year too, where teams are actively looking to run up the score because they need the style points.
Yes and no. I mean, when you're the top 4, you don't need the style points. When you're Clemson, Ohio State, and LSU, all you need to do is win out. It's those other teams that are in the second level. I actually do have Clemson high enough. This past week, I had Ohio State 53 at Rutgers, and I had Northwestern 38. So my power ratings, in fact, I left off a lot of winners last week where I had differences at the end of the week by 3 or 4 points, and they weren't that big of a difference early in the week, and those lines moved so much. So there was some power I left off, and in fact, right now, I dropped Ohio State down 1 with the Rutgers game. I moved up Clemson couple. I now have Clemson at 105 and Ohio State at 104. So I actually have Clemson now ahead of Ohio State for the first time this year.
But if the two teams played in the semifinal, you would not expect Clemson to be -1, right?
Well, we're going to learn a lot. We're going to learn, Ohio State's going through the ringer right now. Clemson, we don't know what we have. Hell, you're done. Your season's over. You have South Carolina and you have an ACC championship. No big deal. Ohio State's going to have Penn State, Michigan, and Minnesota, they may have the toughest 3-game stretch there is in all of college football, let alone a team in the AP top 20 or a team that wants to go potentially to the playoffs. So, if Ohio State looks good, they're going to be ahead of me. But we can see Ohio State get a couple injuries and really get banged up these next 3 weeks, where Clemson's not going to have that as an issue.
I guess one other thing I could ask you about is the teams that do get a 6th win. Now they don't really have to play with that pressure, but teams that play free and easy are usually a lot more dangerous than that team with its back up against the wall. And also, you can improve your bowl standing. So those teams that get to that magic number, are you kind of looking to play on them more than play against them?
It's not a situation that I've looked at, and I'm going to try to, as we're talking, I'm going to try to do that, and we'll go into our first game, Adam, and I'm going to try to do 2 things at once, and we'll figure it out as we're talking about one of the games.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I was just curious because, again, you're talking about a team that's no longer really playing with pressure. It's just about trying to get to a more attractive bowl destination because, some of them aren't particularly great and some of them are really great to get to. So maybe that is kind of an angle for us to explore a little bit here as we go along on today's show. But I want to start by asking you about TCU and Oklahoma, game 137, 138. And it's been fascinating to me to see these Oklahoma lines get bet up with the defense kind of struggling a little bit, with the offense kind of going in spurts. They'll play one good half. They'll play one bad half. That is what we saw from them against Baylor last week. Whereas TCU has been a popular sharp side most of the year here. Oklahoma 17.5 up to as high as 18.5 for this week's game against the Horned Frogs.
I looked up an angle on this because, I know you wanted to talk about it. So here's what I looked up. I looked up home favorites from week 10 on that are off an away win when both teams were ranked in the AP top 15. So obviously Oklahoma was off an away win. Both teams were ranked. You're later in the year, so the rankings meet a lot more, and now you're a home favorite. And I saw the record, and I saw, 19-9, 32.1%. That's a fade against Oklahoma. But a lesson for all our listeners, when you're looking at trends and angles and you have to look at the current form compared to the entire period of time since 1998, from 1998 to 2014, that angle was 2-18. From 2015 to now, it's gone 7-1-1. The exact same angle. So 2-18 for 16 years, 7-1-1 the last 4 seasons. What's changed? Well, I can tell you one thing that's changed, not that entire period of time, is the college football playoffs. One thing that has changed since 2015 is the domination of Alabama and Clemson. They are on the list multiple times. So, when I'm pulling up some of these angles and we're talking about a record back to 1988, it doesn't mean that trend is still valid because of that. So just some note on that. Before we jump into this, Adam, I'm going to give you some kudos. Let me give you what we just talked about before we move on. You are in the month of November. You have 6 wins on the season. You are off a previous win. So you just got your 6th win. And now you are a favorite, 120 and 80, an exact 60% against the spread. So we're not talking 80, but hey, if you've got a situation 60% against the spread and it's a situation that you like, those teams this week are going to be Miami of Ohio, Arkansas State, Washington, Miami of Florida, Iowa State, Louisville, BYU. So if you like those games in the mix, just something for you to think about.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it does make sense because, again, you know you're going to a bowl game now, and you know that you can improve the bowl game that you go to. And of course, too, I mean, you pick up a 6th win already with 2 weeks left in the regular season. You're probably a pretty decent team. And maybe you're playing a team that has quit on the season because you're in that favorite role, or maybe you're playing a team that, is one of those marginal types of teams. So I think that angle does make a lot of sense, and I'm happy to hear it. And again, that's one of the important things about being able to look this stuff up is that you may get an idea in your head and you may say, oh, that sounds like it makes sense. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't, but it's nice when it is quantified and it does look like a pretty good angle.
Adam, I'm gonna put one more scenario in there that we just talked about. Originally I ran the month of November. I ran from week 11 on. So we are in week 13 now. So from week 11 on, that record actually goes to 63.6%. So if you are week 11, 12, or 13 like we are now, and you are just off a win, it's been even stronger. So week 12 on, so if you're in your final week, the percentage actually goes down. So it seems to be a very, very good situation as you talked about. All right, let's talk games. I'm in a fade Oklahoma mode. You look at what they've done in the last 3 weeks, a 3-point win, a 1-point win, a 7-point loss. The Texas game was 7 points. Those are your only true competition. You have a defense that is just giving up 400 plus yards the previous 2 games. We know they held Baylor down, but Baylor was in a pressure pack situation where, you're in an area that you never thought you would be. Talk about Lamb, who missed last game. If they miss him again, they're going to be in a different situation. And I look at TCU and, going to Texas Tech and getting the win, and the Baylor's the tough loss, and Oklahoma State's the tough loss, and Iowa State's a tough loss, and SMU's the tough loss. You look at every loss they've had, they've not had a loss, with the exception of the Iowa State game, by 7 or more. So it's a situation where I think Dugan's going to be able to score enough to keep it close. Obviously you have Oklahoma State on deck if you're OU. You survived. And while people are going to say, well, Oklahoma does need to have style points because they're going to be one of those one-loss teams that potentially has to go up and compare their resume to Bama or some other one-loss teams. Just because you're in that position doesn't mean you can always do it.
Well, and this is one of those things, too. I know you do the college football guides and the stat sheets and all the different stuff that you do over there at Wager Talk. Oklahoma is a very popular team because from a yards per play differential standpoint, they are incredible. So they take a lot of early week money from the quant crowd that does wind up bumping these numbers up a little bit. As the handicapping crowd comes back in the middle of the week, you start to see a little bit of money come in against Oklahoma, or maybe that money just doesn't come in at all if they don't like the spot. So a lot of early week Oklahoma moves that aren't necessarily true moves. They're just based in the statistics for the season.
Well, the interesting thing about Oklahoma is it's, their diff isn't that good because it's their offense that's incredible. They're at a historic pace. I tweeted this out last week. You look at Oklahoma's yards per play on offense. All right, I went back the last 11 years. No one was higher than 7.7 yards per play on offense. Each of the last 3 years, Oklahoma's been 8.9, I think 9.1, and I think 9.5 yards per play. So when you're putting up a first down every play you run, that's going to put you in historic perspective. Buckeyes are number 1 in the yards per play diff, and you look at the Buckeyes right now, they're number 1 on offensive yards per play. They're number 1 on defensive yards per play. The top 4 in yards per play diff, Ohio State 3.6, Ohio State 3.7, Clemson 3.6, Oklahoma 3.4, Alabama 3.0, and then Utah 2.7, UCF 2.5, LSU 2.3. So all that's been made of that LSU offense. They're only plus 2.3 yards per play diff, just ahead of Georgia, Oregon, Memphis, Baylor, and Louisiana Lafayette.
Speaking of UCF, let's talk about them here for a couple of minutes. Game 179-180. This is an interesting one because we've seen a lot of sharp money hit the board on Tulane over the course of the season. So far this week, this line hasn't moved off of 6, with UCF a road favorite going down to the Big Easy there to take on Tulane. What do you think about this game here, Ralph?
I think Tulane has been overrated. I look at, what they did against Temple. I couldn't believe they were that road favorite. They've lost 3 of their last 4 games. Yes, all 3 have been on the road. But this is a young team that Willie Fritz is starting to learn how to win. And I don't understand why they're getting so much love. I mean, their numbers aren't that good. Yeah, their home road dichotomy is incredible. At home, 541 yards per game. On the road, 378. But I think that has to do with competition as well. You played your tougher competition down the stretch. I think UCF's in a position to been there and done that. They're looking through and they say, well, if this happens and this happens and this happens, we still can get to the title game. At least that was in the paper today. So someone's buying into that. But, UCF, the difference with the Knights this year is their defense. You look at UConn getting 426 yards, and that was like, what the hell was that? Couple weeks ago, and then East Carolina getting 483. But they've gone to this rush attack lately, and they've ran the ball over 40 times, 5 of the last 6 games. They have 4 running backs, all over 400 yards, all averaging over 5.6 yards per carry. All of them are going to be healthy this week. And when that running attack allows your defense to be on the field for fewer plays, it's showing that we have a very good defense. This UCF defense only allowing 3.4 yards per carry, only allowing 54% completions. We know Tulane wants to run the ball. I think UCF can shut them down and do that. And I do like the Golden Knights here, or just the Knights, I should say.
All right, so let's talk some college basketball here as we transition to a very different kind of sport, but stay in the college ranks. And we talked on yesterday's show with Kyle Hunter about all the unders that we've seen here so far this season. So outside of that, Ralph, what else stands out to you in terms of the first couple weeks of the college hoops season?
There's not that much. I mean, we're seeing some upsets, and I think the biggest thing is coaches are now recruiting grad transfers. They're setting up their lineups with transfers. It used to be in college basketball, if you had a team with 5 returning starters or 4 returning starters with a point guard, playing a team with 0 returning starters or 1 returning starter with no point guard, it was almost an automatic play on. But we're seeing teams like Memphis that return no starters that are bringing in the grad transfers and the young freshmen. Nevada is another one. Nevada is a team that doesn't return any starters, but hell, they're very competitive because of their grad transfers. And we're seeing so many more grad transfers where kids used to stay. Now they're gone. They transfer and they get to go in a situation they want to go to. And hell, a kid gets on the grad transfer and everyone's just jumping out and recruiting them. We're seeing it in football. Look at the quarterbacks that have gone. Oklahoma has a sign up, grad transfer quarterback needed next year. They know they're going to need one, and who's going to be that? Maybe Ohio State, the same thing. So it really is. The returning starters is becoming such a fake number where, next year I'm going to have to redo the way I do my guide. We'll do percentage of minutes back and then list the grad transfers that are there. So it's just going to take a little more work to get that first week or first couple weeks under your belt in college hoops.
Do you feel like you're starting to settle in a little bit here? I know obviously it was a very tough opening night. I know you were very honest and transparent about that, but since then, do you feel like things are kind of becoming, more of the status quo that you expected?
Yeah. I've been on a 13-8 run since that opening offer. And again, this is college basketball. I'm not worried about an offer for my season-long record. To me, it was just so devastating because I had so many first-time customers on, and you can only make a first impression once. And there's a lot of guys that you do an offer like that, they're never going to be back with you ever again. They're just going to say screw you, and they remember that. But it also reading the write-ups, people could say, oh yeah, wow, these 3 teams actually led at halftime, and we only lost this game by a point or 2 points. So it depends on what level of customer you have, and that helps you move forward. But absolutely in sync now. Looking for the value where they're still there with the unders. We're still seeing value with coaches being changed and styles being changed. I guess the one that jumps off the page to me is, Cronin going from Cincinnati to UCLA. And, we saw them have many more unders early because they just can't make the line low enough, thinking that this running UCLA team is turning to the Cincinnati team of old. So, learning what we are, we still have our mid-majors that are surprising us. Kentucky's upset. Evansville's a very good team. I was actually on them last night with a loss against SMU, but there's a handful of mid-majors that are still there. And the biggest thing for me is the number of grad transfers this year and how they're changing the way you have to look at the college basketball in the preseason.
Well, it's interesting, too, a game that we're not going to talk about, but one that I did preview over at BangTheBook.com here today, New Mexico and UTEP, a couple of teams that have really hit the grad transfer market hard. That's expected to be one of the top games here tonight. But one of the other games that everyone has an eye on this evening, and we'll talk about a game for Tuesday night, one for Wednesday night, and also one for Thursday night here to finish up the show. Game 665, 666, Furman and Alabama. This one was Alabama -3. Now up to as high as 4.5 out there in the market, as Nate Oates is kind of off to a little bit of a slow start trying to mold his team into what he wants.
For those that followed the Buffalo Bulls last year, that tempo-wise, they were one of the quickest teams in the country. Well, I'll tell you what, Nate Oates is now the coach of Alabama, and Nate Oates is going to be one of the quickest teams in the country at Alabama. The problem is his guards can't handle it. 22 turnovers against Rhode Island. And he said they're going through growing pains. You have a transfer, Jonathan Query from Villanova, a 5-star recruit. He had not been eligible yet. He may be eligible for tonight. So that's a big if. If he plays, Alabama, a better team. You also have another point guard, Bell Bolden. He's a game time decision with an injury. If both of those guys are out, I like Furman. Furman's 4-0. Furman's 52-18 under Bob Ritchie as a coach. They can go on the road and win. But with this game, it's going to be a late game for me to see and make sure you check out Query if he becomes eligible, and James Bell Bolden, the transfer from West Virginia. If those two are both out, I'll be jumping on the Furman side.
Now, we talked about this a lot with our mutual friend Brad Powers about how difficult it can be to find injury information in college football. Do you find, a good resources for college basketball for finding out injuries?
No, I don't. It's just a lot of work. It's a lot of newspapers. It's a lot of going through Twitter. And even then, you don't find it because coaches and teams aren't going to tweet out if a player is hurt. It really is just a lot of reading. And there's often times where I find that the opposing beat writer covers the team better and is much more honest about injuries than the team beat writer. The team beat writer is in the paper. He's covering these guys daily. He's talking to the coaches, and, he's giving a lot of times at the beginning of the season, he's writing his forecast with rose-colored glasses on, where, an opposing writer is going to say, hey, listen, Illinois Chicago was without 4 returning starters 2 weeks ago in their first 2 games. Now's the opportunity to get them. They're going to get 2 back this week, so we'll see what happens. So don't stop at reading your local beat writer. Make sure you read the previous beat writer for the game before and what the preview is in the opposition's newspaper.
So we look at Wednesday night's card here in college basketball. Obviously, no lines out for these as of yet. They'll come out here sometime this afternoon. But some of the situational things that we talked about on last week's show, Georgia Tech and Georgia, a game we're going to talk a little bit more about here in a couple minutes. Portland State, San Diego, Belmont and Lipscomb. A lot of these are really crosstown types of rivalries, or, little brother, big brother, or something like that. A lot of those games popping up here at this time of the year. Again, like I said, we'll focus on Georgia Tech and Georgia, though. Do you handicap these games any differently when, there are some revenge angles or anything like that?
Well, I don't have any revenge angles that I can share with you and say, and it just really depends. where the coaches are and how many starters the teams had back and how experienced they were. Georgia's now won 4 straight against Georgia Tech and covered 4 straight. And in fact, they've won those last 4 games all by double digits, averaging 16 points per game. They've covered them. They've covered all 4 by over 15 points per game. But in this situation here, if I can get Georgia Tech +4 or more, I will be on them. I'm looking at Georgia, and you look at a 3-0 record, and you may think, wow, this 3-0 record's impressive with a 19-point win, with a 9-point win, and with a 34-point win. Well, when you look at their strength of schedule, they've played the number 350th, basically the lowest schedule. When you look at the defenses they've played, they have played the weakest slate of defenses in the entire country. Western Carolina's a defensive efficiency 328, Citadel 346, Delaware 351. You are now playing a fired up in-state rival that's lost 4 in a row, and they have the number 41 defense. With Georgia Tech, you're only 2-0, but you've been tested. You played a ACC game. You went into NC State and you won in overtime. That's impressive to me. That gets you ready to take on this Georgia team. You then come home. Is there a letdown after that NC State win? No. You beat Elon handily by 23. I'm going to grab Georgia Tech +4 or more. Potential, they'll be on my card.
Is this about the time of the year where you start looking at some of the strength of schedule mismatches then?
Yeah, only when they're this obvious. Only when, you can't look at a statistical profile of Georgia and say, oh my gosh, they're plus 32 points per game without looking at they played the weakest schedule there is. And, anyone can tell you, if you have 3 easy games and they're all at home, and you're not even tested, going into game 4, that's a difficult thing to do. The other thing is just look ahead. Georgia played those 3 weak foes. They got Georgia Tech now, and then they play their first neutral game next Monday against Dayton. That's a game they can easily lose as well.
All right, one more game I want to talk about, and then I just want to talk in general about something coming up here this weekend. But that game is Texas and Georgetown. And correct me if I'm wrong, this one at Madison Square Garden, with a pretty good matchup here between the Longhorns, who've been very, very good so far here at the outset of the season, and Georgetown with Patrick Ewing really trying to build this program up a little bit. What do you think about Thursday night's game there between those two teams?
Well, to me, it's one of the biggest edges there is. And the reason is, what did Texas just do last year? Oh, yeah. Texas didn't make the NCAA tournament. They were pissed off about that. What happens? They go to the NIT. What do? They win the NIT. Where were their last 2 games in the NIT? Madison Square Garden. So you have a team that just went to Madison Square Garden for the Final Four, for the NIT championships. Now starts this year, fired up because they didn't make the tournament. Shaka Smart, another team removed. You're 4-0. You already went to Purdue. You handled yourselves on the road. You took care of the teams you were supposed to at home. Northern Colorado, not a horrible team. Cal Baptist, not a horrible team. Did what you had to against Prairie View. You have no one on deck because you have McNeese State. That's another 9 days. And with Georgetown, Georgetown already has 1 loss to Penn State. And I look at Georgetown, and it's not that often that a player's slump concerns me, but you read the Georgetown papers, and Mac McClung, one of their starters who had 19 doubles, scored in double figures 19 times last year, scored over 20 3 times. He has really struggled. He's shooting under 30%. Patrick Ewing says we have to get him to stay in there, but when he's in there, he's a defensive liability. So the Shaka Smart defense against the Georgia front court, Mac McClung struggling for Georgetown, Texas back in MSG. I will clearly be on Texas. I'll be looking to lay anything about 6 or less in that range.
All right, so something you and I talked about off air last week, because we were kind of wondering when this would start to be a thing. A lot of early season tournaments here that start Thursday, Friday, the Bahamas, Montego Bay, couple of them in South Carolina. What is it that you're looking for to play on or against these teams when they do have to play these back-to-backs or 3-3s in these tournaments?
It's just box score study. There is nothing that I can say, hey, the favorites, the dogs, the revenges, the seconds, the thirds. It's just looking at matchups. When you have some of these big mismatches, it's hard to know what you get out of a team. But a lot of times these tournaments are pretty equal, where there's people in the same categories. And, it is just looking at how many minutes they played, what kind of point guards they have. It's still early in the season. The teams that play better defense is usually something I look at because, the offense, your legs can't get tired shooting threes. Your defense, you seem to keep the same intensity. So no secret at all. It's reading the local papers as well as the local schools' papers. Even the Bahamas, you go and read some of the Bahamas newspapers, they have good stories on these teams. They have beat writers that are excited to do it. And, sports writers, not beat writers, but that cover these games and give you little trinkets of what's going on in the games. And also, who they have ahead. When you're looking at a team and they're playing an opponent that they know they're going to beat and they have a tougher game on deck, there's many times that I look and perhaps might play a first half play because you're going to go full bore in the first half. But in the second half, when you're playing a second of back-to-back, you may start getting a few guys in there that you may need the next day that haven't played the minutes because your games have been spread out. So again, knowing what the schedule is, who you play if you win, because they all know who they play if they win. The coaches are already scouting them and will continue to scout them during the tournament. But who you have on deck is as important as who you played.
Ralph Michaels, professional handicapper over at wagertalk.com. What's going on over there right now, Ralph?
Again, college football's winding down, guys, but if you've not been there, the power ratings, I could care less if you like them or not. This college football stat compare sheet to me is just still so valuable because you're looking at strength of schedules and these stats that they have. Check out it a little later today. I will have an NFL last 5 weeks. I will have only the NFL stats for the last 5 weeks. So you're going to have yards per game diff, yards per play diffs, where their offense ranks, where their defense ranks. And when you get into November and December in the NFL, if you find teams that over the last 4 or 5 games has an advantage rushing with their offense against the defense and has an advantage with their rush defense against the opposition's offense, that's something you want to look at very closely this time of the year.
Once again, make sure that you're following Ralph on Twitter as well, at CalSportsLV. Ralph Michaels, wagertalk.com. Appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll talk to you again next week.
Adam, always a pleasure. Thank you.